band at Grateful Dead concerts. He used those monies to fund farm animal rescue, and today he serves as president of Farm Sanctuary, the nation's leading farm organization protecting animals, with shelters in New York and California. Gene has visited hundreds of farms, stockyards, and slaughterhouses documenting the deplorable conditions. His pictures and videos exposing factory farming cruelties have aired internationally, educating millions about the plight of modern farm animals, and his rescue work has helped to inspire an international farm sanctuary movement. Gene has testified in courts and before local, state, and federal legislative bodies advocating for better conditions for farm animals. Gene won the first ever cruelty conviction at a U.S. stockyard and helped to introduce the first laws prohibiting cruel farming confinement methods in Florida, Arizona, and California. Today, Gene provides simple, actionable solutions coupled with a compassion-first approach to help us be the change we wish to see in treatment towards animals and in our food system. Gene holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from California State University, Northridge, and a master's degree in agricultural economics from Cornell University. In 2010, Gene was granted a faculty appointment in health behavior and society at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Time magazine called him the conscience of the food movement. Wow. And he was recently named one of Oprah Winfrey's Super Soul 100 Givers. VSDC appreciates Gene's tremendous commitment and his energy in spreading the vegan message to so many people. Please join me in welcoming Gene Baur to the stage for our keynote address.
Well, thank you so much for that very kind introduction, and thank you all for being here. It is wonderful to be celebrating a vegan Thanksgiving.
Yes.
It's beautiful also to hear about the history of the Vegetarian Society, now Veg Society of DC, starting 90 years ago. You know, this idea of eating plants instead of animals is actually not a new idea. I mean, even Pythagoras, back thousands of years ago, was a vegan. And, you know, I think though we have sort of lost our way and we have gotten used to lots of bad habits about the way we eat, and that's why events like this and the work of the Veg Society of DC are so important, to just start getting people to think about our food choices and ultimately to make choices that are aligned with our values and our interests. And, you know, most people grow up eating animal foods without really thinking about it. That was the case with myself. You know, I grew up eating meat, dairy, and eggs without really thinking very much about it, but I did it because everybody around me was doing it. And something that I've increasingly come to recognize is just how important our social environment is. You know, we are social animals influenced by those around us. Most of us grew up eating meat because everybody around us was eating meat. And we just thought that's the normal way of doing things. And then, for many of us, we just started thinking, paying attention, and recognizing the incredible suffering and cruelty that animals endure in animal agriculture, and learning about the environmental impacts of animal agriculture, and then recognizing that it is possible to live well without eating other animals. And for myself, I felt if I can live well without causing unnecessary harm, why wouldn't I? So in 1985, I went vegan. 1986, co-founded Farm Sanctuary. Started by doing investigations, thinking that if we exposed what was happening and people saw just how bad it was, people would not want to support this horrible factory farming industry. But that sort of assumes that people are rational and make choices that are thought through and ultimately make sense. And I think human beings have that potential, but rather than saying that human beings are rational animals, I think it's much more accurate to say that human beings are rationalizing animals. And we tend to rationalize if we don't like what we're doing. So when we are doing something we don't feel very good about, we come up with reasons. And in the case of eating meat, one of the reasons, or I should say myths, is that we need meat for protein. That's completely inaccurate. We can live very well, in fact better, obtaining our nutrients, including protein, from plants. The only U.S. male weightlifter to qualify for the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro in 2016 was a vegan, for example. Scott Jurek, an ultramarathoner who's legendary, won the Western States 100-mile race 7 times in a row, won a Spartathlon, so 150-something mile race, did it all as a vegan. So we can get everything we need not only to survive, but to thrive on plant foods. And so this idea we need meat for protein is a myth, but it is something that we oftentimes tell ourselves and tell others and say over and over to rationalize a behavior that is not necessary and is in fact very harmful. Another belief that we often have, and we're bombarded with marketing and messaging and commercials, is that we need to drink cow's milk to get calcium so we don't get osteoporosis, right? And a lot of us have probably heard this. Well, in our country, we drink a lot of cow's milk, and we also get a lot of osteoporosis. So, if you look at empirical reality, this idea of drinking cow's milk to prevent osteoporosis doesn't really work. But again, it's one of these beliefs that we're bombarded with growing up in a society where eating meat, milk, and eggs is the norm. And, as I said, I grew up eating meat, milk, and eggs without thinking about it. And then when I learned about these issues and decided I wanted to be vegan, then everybody around me thought I was crazy. And so for those of you who are vegan, you potentially had this experience where, and food is a very emotional thing. It sort of defines our identity, it defines who we are. And, people are known by what they eat. Oftentimes in sort of not a positive way, like in French you're called frogs and Germans are called krauts, for example. But food really is a big part of identifying who we are. And so changing and deciding I'm not going to eat the way I was raised and I'm going to become vegan instead of eating the typical American diet, now you are sort of dividing yourself from the norm. And that's why being vegan in a non-vegan world can be so challenging. And that's why events like this are so wonderful, where vegans can come together and celebrate a holiday and do it in a way that feels right and aligned with our values and aligned with our interests. So for those of you who are vegan, thank you for making that choice. Thank you for recognizing the benefits of eating plants instead of animals. And for those of you who are not vegan, thank you very much for being here. Thank you for being open-minded, for being curious, and for thinking about these issues, which are not very easy to think about. So often, when the issue of factory farming comes up, people say, don't tell me, I don't want to know, it's too upsetting. And I think that's telling. It is upsetting. But I don't think saying, I don't want to know, is a really good answer. I think it's important for us ultimately to be responsible and then to live in a way and make choices that are aligned with our values instead of saying, don't tell me, I don't want to know. And when it comes to making choices that are aligned with our interests, it's been estimated that we could save 70% on healthcare costs in the U.S., 70%, by shifting to a whole foods plant-based diet. That's massive. So why are we eating food that's making us sick? It's completely irrational. But we are creatures of habit, we are social animals. If everybody around us is doing something, we tend to start doing it. And then we think it's normal. Everybody's doing this. And then when we get to be a certain age, we go on heart medication. And you know what? We think that's normal because everybody's doing it. I'm 55 now, and I hadn't been to a doctor in decades, so about 8 or so years ago, I went to a doctor just to get a checkup and make sure everything's fine. And this doctor starts asking me questions about my family history. And he asks if there's any heart disease in the family, and I said, yes, that my grandfather died of a heart attack, and my father had a heart attack. And this doctor, without taking any blood tests, says, well, I might want to put you on heart medication. So for doctors, that's sort of the norm. They go to these continuing education classes that are oftentimes sponsored by the pharmaceutical companies, and they learn what sort of drugs work with what sorts of illnesses, and that's what they know. They don't even really think about preventing illness, or, Hippocrates' words, let food be thy medicine, Hippocrates being the founder of Western medicine. So people become creatures of habit, we develop bad habits, and if everybody around us is doing it, we assume it is normal. When my father had his heart attack and he was in the hospital, they were feeding him bacon and eggs. And I called the hospital, pretty upset as you can imagine, and the doctor wouldn't even get on the phone. But I talked to a nurse and I said, what is this? Is this the come back and see us diet? What are you doing? So after that, my father read a book by Dean Ornish about reversing heart disease by eating plants instead of animals, and he actually became a vegetarian for a little while. It didn't last, I'm sorry to say. But the fact that he realized that eating animal foods was contributing to health problems, and still ultimately went back to eating animal foods, again, I think speaks to the complexity of human beings and how we are very much social animals, and it is very hard to be different from those around you. So our point of view, this vegan point of view, is one that is a minority point of view. In some cases, it is denigrated. There is hostility to it in some cases. I think of people like Jackie Robinson, the first African American to play Major League Baseball, and the sorts of things he had to deal with, and he dealt with hostility in a graceful but strong way. And I think of people like that as models for us as vegans who are sort of speaking out for a different food system in an emotionally charged world where changing how we eat is perceived as criticizing the mainstream. When I went vegan, I think my family felt that I was rejecting them, for instance, but that's certainly not what I was doing, but that is part of the emotional struggle and challenge that people face when their position and their point of view is not the mainstream point of view. And there are subtle ways that different sorts of prejudices against vegan food or against points of view that are not mainstream exist, that we are sometimes unaware of, and in fact, in most cases, unaware of. And, one of the things that happens, I talked about human beings being rationalizing animals, and how we rationalize behaviors in order, I think, to make ourselves feel good. And one of the ways that human beings rationalize our mistreatment of others, whether they be other humans or other animals, is that we tend to denigrate our victims in order to make us feel okay about doing bad things to those other creatures because, you know what, they really don't deserve any better. So this has a whole other level of psychological, I would call it even pathology. And there are subtle things that happen in our society that most of us are not aware of, that are indications of this denigration of victims. Being called a pig, for example, right, is not a compliment. Being called a turkey is not a compliment. It's actually a double denigration of the human and of the animal. But, when you get to know pigs and turkeys and cows and chickens and other animals and recognize they're not that different than cats and dogs, or that they have the same feelings, that they develop relationships, they have personalities, they have memories, they dream. Now, I remember going into the pig barn when I used to spend a lot of time on the farm and seeing these pigs, like if anybody here has a dog, and I'm sure some people do, when they're sleeping and they're dreaming and they're running, pigs do that too. So these are animals that have complex cognitive and emotional lives. And we don't see that. And instead of wanting to see that, I think so often when we are engaged in behaviors that are causing enormous pain and suffering to these other animals, we don't want to see it, so we start looking the other way and then start developing beliefs that are not fair, that are not accurate, that are not good for other animals, and they're also not good for us. Because it closes down our eyes, it closes down our hearts, it closes down our empathy. And empathy is a critically important part of our humanity. And when we're behaving in a way that is not aligned with our humanity, I think we lose part of ourselves. You know, over the years, I've spent a lot of time dealing with the factory farming industry and the concept of animals as commodities. And, you know, for us at Farm Sanctuary, these animals are our friends, not our food. They are fellow earthlings. And we have turkeys that follow you around like puppy dogs. So often when people visit the sanctuary, they're really moved by and touched by how friendly and companionable turkeys are. And then sometimes when you sit down, the turkey will come and sit on your lap in the barnyard. And you see that they are not that different than cats and dogs and other animals who want to just live and enjoy their lives and not be factory farmed, not be abused, not be slaughtered. And can you imagine what it would be like as a human being working in a slaughterhouse? What that experience is. That's bad for the animals, and it's also bad for people. And if you think of the experience of going to a factory farm, where you see turkeys raised by the thousands in these warehouses, where the air is so thick with toxic fumes that your eyes and your nose and your throat burn just walking in. And the animals live there their whole lives. Or going into a factory farm where pigs are kept in 2-foot wide metal crates their whole lives. And I've been into these places, and you hear the animals clanking against the bars. They're in misery. They're screaming to get out. And again, the air is thick with toxic fumes that burns your eyes and your nose and your throat. And the animals live there their whole lives. So that's horrible for the animals. And the stress of those places is palpable. And so for the workers in those places, you know, they also suffer from respiratory problems. They also have to close down their empathy. And that's not good for anybody. And you contrast that experience, the factory farm experience or the slaughterhouse experience, with going to a sanctuary, where you see cows running in the fields, kicking up their legs, kicking up their heels. Where you see pigs who want belly rubs, and when you walk up to them at a sanctuary, they know that might be a belly rub coming. And you touch their tummy, and 600-pound pigs flop over on their side for a belly rub. And they grunt, and they communicate, and they say, "Keep going, please, I love this." We have sheep who also love to be petted by human beings. And after you stop petting them and you're ready to walk away, they start pawing at you like a cat or a dog, saying, "Come on, please keep petting me." So these animals are not that different, again, than cats and dogs. They have emotions, they have feelings, they have memories, they develop relationships. And to me, what it is to be vegan is to try to create mutually beneficial relationships with other animals. And, you know, to me, also being vegan is not so much of an ingredient list, although that's part of it, you know, looking what we eat and try not to support an abusive industry. But to me, ultimately and fundamentally, what being vegan is it's an aspiration to live as kindly as possible. And that means kindness to other animals, including people. It means kindness to the earth, and it means kindness to ourselves. It means trying not to cause unnecessary harm to others. And it's an imperfect attempt. You know, we are human beings. We're going to make mistakes. Even the most vegan is not perfect, believe it or not. So I think it's important for us just to realize that we are all works in progress, and we can all do a little bit better. And we are going to make mistakes. And when we make mistakes, don't let it destroy us. You know, recognize it's a mistake. I'm going to learn, and I'm not going to do it again, and move forward. You know, that's really the key. And I think in a community like this, it's so important to support each other in efforts to take positive steps with vegans and with people that are not vegan. And I use the term vegan, but I would also say that in some ways, using that term can be a little bit problematic because you're either in or you're out of the group. And I don't think that that's a healthy way to look at it. I think we are all works in progress. And as I said, even the most vegan is not perfect. We're all just aspiring to do better. So interacting with others and creating a positive encouragement is, I think, such a critically important part, for me anyway, of my vegan activism. And I am a strong proponent of vegan integration, vegans interacting with non-vegans. And you know what? And that also hopefully makes us try to be nice and friendly and helpful. You know, in some cases it's fun, or it's very inspiring and invigorating and validating to be among like-minded vegans. An event like this, for example, that is important. We're social animals. We need to be supported. But it's also, I think, positive to get out in a non-vegan world and to represent and to bring great vegan food to work or to parties or to events and show people just how tasty it is. And you know, back years ago, whenever I saw the word vegan on a menu, I would really be happy. And I'm still happy to see the word vegan on menus, but now I think if it says vegan, it better taste good. You know, because as I mentioned before, there's a little bit of a prejudice against vegan food and a vegan lifestyle. And, you know, people think that vegan food is sticks and twigs, right? And if somebody tries something that's labeled as vegan and they don't like it, there's a tendency for them to potentially say, I tried vegan food, I don't like it. Even one dish. So I think that as vegan advocates, food can be one of our most powerful tools to educate. There are so many times when people have heard about me being a vegan and they tell me, I could never do that, it's too hard. But the same people, after a tasty vegan meal, say, oh wow, if it was like that, it would be easy, I could do that. So, you know, human beings, as much potential we have of being conscientious and thoughtful actors on Earth, we are also oftentimes just very much influenced by convenience and taste and simple, easy things. So to the extent we vegan advocates can make eating vegan food easy and tasty and satisfying and simple, I think we will have more of an effect on creating positive change. And we are seeing this now like never before. Information about factory farming is widely available through the internet, through videos that people can share, also through Netflix and various documentaries. So the awareness about the issues is greater than ever, and not only about the problems, because besides sharing information about animal cruelty that you can do online, you can also share information about vegan lasagna recipes or other, you know, solutions. And I think it's important for us to show the problems, but not to dwell in the problems, and essentially to really dwell in and empower and inspire and support and encourage solutions. Even if somebody takes a very small step, like, for example, saying, I'm not going to eat veal. You know, and the younger activist in me might have said, you're not going to eat veal, but what about dairy? And, you know, that's not an inaccurate statement. The veal industry is literally born out of the dairy industry. For a cow to have milk, she has to have a calf. The males born on dairy farms are useless to the dairy industry. So the veal industry was actually created to use all these unwanted male calves. So it's not inaccurate to say, well, what about dairy? But instead of focusing on this area of discontent, I will now focus on the area that is positive and recognize that this person says they're not eating veal. They're doing that because they care. They don't want to cause suffering. And I'm going to honor and support and encourage that. So I will focus on that now instead of on the part that's not in the right direction, in my opinion. Another thing that often happens is people will say, I hate factory farming, I never buy factory farmed meat, I only buy humane meat, right? So how do we deal with this one? Now, again, the younger activist in me might have said, there's no such thing as humane meat. And although I may still believe that, my approach is going to be different. I believe that finding common ground and building from there is a very effective way to create awareness, build bridges, and move things in a positive direction. So somebody says, I hate factory farming, I don't buy that, I only buy humane meat. What I'll do now is I will say, it's great that you're against factory farming. I am too. We're completely on the same page. Common ground. And again, it's somebody that probably is against cruelty. That is something to celebrate and to embrace and to encourage and hopefully to build. And then I'll ask, now when you say humane meat, what do you mean by that? Because there's a very good chance that the person hasn't really thought very much about what humane meat is. They just see the word humane or cage-free or free-range, and they assume, oh, it's okay, I don't need to worry about it anymore. But when you ask the question, people then have to think about their response. And when they start thinking about this stuff, that's usually a positive step. Because when people think about it, they start really realizing what it is. And then I usually take that opportunity to say that a lot of these labels, like humane and cage-free and so on, sound a lot better than they are. And there is not accurate a reflection of people's expectations in the actual way the animals are treated, that the oversight is inadequate, and that most of these free-range animal products are basically coming from factory farms. So you try to explain that. And essentially, at the end of the day, people have to grapple with the concept of whether the word humane and the word slaughter really fit well together. And I try to frame it again in a more objective way, rather than saying meat is murder, there's no such thing as humane killing, which again I may believe, but framing it as, when you think about it, do you think the word humane and the word slaughter fit very well together? And I think, if somebody's going to be rational, it's pretty hard to say that those things go together. And so, at the end of the day, most people, I think, want to be humane. Most people don't want to cause unnecessary suffering and killing. Most people don't like what that looks like. Most people also, I believe, want to eat food that is nourishing and doesn't make them sick. And I think most people want to support a food system that doesn't destroy the planet. The United Nations has reported that animal agriculture is one of the top contributors to the most significant environmental problems our planet faces, including the loss of biodiversity, including the cutting down of rainforests, including climate change. Animal agriculture is a bigger contributor to climate change than the entire transportation industry. So, and I think most people would rather live on a planet that's not being destroyed through our behaviors. So, if people can start making choices that are better aligned with their values and interests, even incremental steps like going meatless on Monday, for example. And yes, I wish they were meatless 7 days a week, but a small step often leads to another step. And each step, if it's encouraged and nurtured and supported, often leads to more steps. And that's, I think, ultimately how change happens. And we're at a time now where businesses are starting to respond and recognize that there's a move towards plant-based food. Even companies like Cargill, and this is not like a vegan-friendly company exactly, but they recently renamed the Cargill Meat Solutions division and changed it to Cargill Protein Solutions, recognizing that plant-based protein is going to be a larger part of their business. And they've expanded their soy protein division, they've added a new pea protein division. Tyson Foods, again, not somebody you would consider to be vegan-friendly, recently invested in Beyond Meat, which is a mission-driven vegan company that seeks to replace animal meat with plant-based meat. So there's a lot of really exciting things happening now in the business arena, and I think as businesses shift, so too will government policy, You know, we have the best government money can buy, it's been said, and I think that's true. And agribusiness has invested for decades in Washington, D.C. and in state capitals, but there's now a new association in Washington called the Plant-Based Foods Association, which represents the interests of plant-based food companies. And it's not just vegan companies, it's companies like Campbell Soup, who just left the Grocery Manufacturers Association and joined the Plant-Based Foods Association. So there's these things starting to happen, and I think it's because these businesses recognize that there are opportunities to make money selling plant foods. And businesses are not necessarily for cruelty, or they're not necessarily against cruelty. They're basically amoral. They just want to make money. And if they can make money doing vegan things, they're going to do vegan things. And so I think that for each of us, in addition to voting for politicians that we believe in, it's important for us to vote with our dollars every day and to support companies that we believe in that are making a positive difference. And that's where the whole vegan movement is so important, and where things are starting to happen now in the marketplace. And I think groups like the Veg Society here have played a very important role for a long time. It's great to see so many people here today. I'm going to be at my table a little later on selling books and signing books, so if anybody wants those, I'd be happy to do that. People are also welcome to come visit Farm Sanctuary or other farm animal sanctuaries and get to know farm animals, see them as living, feeling creatures, not as commodities. And, you know, when you look into the eyes of these animals, it does something to you. And I'll just close on this story about the Salem witch hunts, which might seem very off target, but it's very fitting. During the Salem witch hunts, the executioners who were charged with killing the witches were told not to look into their eyes. Because, it was said, if you look into their eyes, these witches would cast a spell on you and you couldn't kill them. When you look into their eyes, you see there's somebody there. And when you see there's somebody there, you don't want to kill them. And that's just the humane, human thing to do. And we're all doing that here today. We're all eating plants instead of animals. That is good for us. It is good for animals. It is good for the environment. It makes all the sense in the world when you think about it. So it's great to be here with you all, and I'll just close with that. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's thank Gene one more time for sharing his great insights. So as you can tell, few people have spent so much time with animals in environments where they're cared for, nurtured, and loved, as well as witnessing the horrific ways we humans exploit and abuse animals.